Good evening, everyone. My name is Raquel Willis. I am the Director of Communications for the Miss Foundation for Women, and I am so excited to welcome you to our fifth conversation and also our finale for the Women in Power series brought to you by the Center for Brooklyn History and, of course, the Miss Foundation. 100 years ago, the 19th Amendment granted white women and many other women of certain privileges the right to vote, but not women of color. To mark this unfinished moment, we come together again to shine a light on gender and racial inequality that still exists today. If you're returning, we are always glad to have you back. And if this is your first time with us, we are so excited to focus on people power with you. From suffrage to Black Lives Matter to the fight for Indigenous sovereignty, women of color have been at the heart and forefront of social justice movement for generations, period. This finale turns its gaze to the struggles of today, the leading roles that women of color continue to play, and the search for that solidarity we hope can put systemic oppression on the ropes. So first, we have Candace Montgomery, who is a powerful Black and queer organizer, facilitator, and strategist working to expand the collective ability of individuals to build power that transforms systems. Currently, they live in Minneapolis and have spent the last decade developing programming, training, and strategies that center the lives of people of color in local, state, and national organizations. Candace's political home rests with Black Visions Collective, which is where they also serve in the powerful and tremendous role of executive director. And you may have heard of Black Visions Collective over the last really half a year, if not before, as all eyes globally turn to them in the wake of the horrific police killing of George Floyd. We also have Enei Begaye, who is the executive director of Native Movement. Enei is of the Dine and Tohono O'odham nations. She is Tachini and of the Todishi clans. And her partner is of the Gwich'in Nation from Arctic Village, Alaska. And together they parent 4 glorious children. Enei is a longtime community organizer, training facilitator, and advocate on many issues, including environmental justice, economic justice, climate justice, and of course, the rights of Indigenous peoples. And Enei is the co-founder and active member of the Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition and the Black Mesa Water Coalition. And we will hear more of Enei's glorious work as we continue to discuss tonight. In terms of Native movement, they support grassroots-led projects that align with their vision, that dismantles oppressive systems for all, and an endeavor to ensure social justice for Indigenous people's rights and the rights of Mother Earth. We also have Toni-Michelle Williams, who is an auto theorist, performance artist, and executive director of Solutions Not Punishments Collaborative, also called SNAPCO. She is a native of Atlanta, Georgia. She is a celebrated community organizer in prison abolition and prison reform issues. And she has been committed to transforming Atlanta, particularly through the work with SNAPCO by co-leading campaigns that has closed the Atlanta City Detention Center, reformed cannabis laws, and has called for a culture and policy shift that would protect sex worker rights and the end to criminalization of Black, trans, and queer people. And she And additionally, she is regarded for her innovation and framework development for Black transgender feminism. Yes. And peer-led, community-based leadership development for Black trans women. And I have to say, Toni-Michelle is also a dear friend, and SNAPCO is one of my forever political homes. So I am so excited to welcome all of you and bring all of your brilliant thoughts, concerns about the world, and actions into this space. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, so excited. Thanks.
Of course. So before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that we will have a Q&A portion towards the end of this conversation. So please drop your pressing, maybe not so pressing, powerful questions into the chat, and we just might get a chance to elevate them. So to start off, I think it's important for us to kind of unpack power, right, and our relationship to it. So I'm curious, and this is a question to all of you, how have you reclaimed your power for yourself in a society and a world that has continuously told you that it isn't yours? And maybe we'll start with Enei, because you're nodding like you got something.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, growing up, I grew up on the Navajo reservation, and had a lot of the stereotypes that I wasn't really aware of until I left the reservation to go to college in California. And then, you know, for me, I grew up actually in a very matriarchal family and community. My people are matriarchal. And so, yeah, coming into kind of mainstream society outside of my own family was shocking. And I think community organizing has been the way in which I reclaim power. And it's really the basis and foundation for which I believe change can happen as well. I think when we kind of unapologetically, when we just unapologetically speak our truth and live in our ideals of our innate power, I think we begin to build power not only amongst our own community or amongst our own people, but I think at the foundation for me, building power amongst Indigenous and Black leadership is essential at this point. Like we are communities that have built this nation, and we are essential to stepping forward, reclaiming our power, and moving change. So I see that happening through community organizing, through building people power, and that's how I've reclaimed that, and bringing great teams together that really follow our truth unapologetically, and change the narrative on the broader scale.
Absolutely. Candace, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. It's a good one. You know, I think in addition to what's been said, what I would also offer for myself is it's a lot about my belonging. I think as a Black person, as a queer person, as also a person who like grew up in rural Maine around a bunch of white people, my belonging has always been in question. And I think that like what I know about my parents' life is that their belonging, their worth has always been in question. And a lot of, I feel like my work and what connects me to organizing is just affirming that I belong, you know, that I get to be here, that we have an inherent right to be here, and that we are allowed to do so with dignity. and that I get to do so with dignity, you know, and that has just been a like lifelong, you know, in my like short-ish life process of just really like consistently coming back to that question when it comes up. So I think that it's there. And then when we like claim that, that is like also when we build power, you know, as we say, like no more of this crap. Can we swear on this thing? I'm like so East Coast, so like we can? Okay.
But don't get out of hand.
Don't get out of hand. But you know, so I think that, you know, pushing back on that is like how we organize. And then the other piece is, I think, especially as like a young person, as a person who has radical politics, like affirming my visions. You know, I remember when in 2018 we were like 5% from the police budget is going to be our demand, and that is like a wild thing, you know, and everybody thought we were like out of pocket for that demand and unrealistic, and now look where we're at, you know. Even our whack mayor has reduced the budget by, you know, by like 7 million or something, and that's not enough. But so I just think that also it's like about affirming, like, yeah, like this isn't too radical, like this is actually very right, like this is life affirming. And like as soon as we stop questioning that, we actually can like build strategy that builds the kind of power necessary to not just get the things that we need, but like the things we want, you know, like I need housing. I want a house that I feel comfortable in, right? Those are very different things. So that's it for me.
Yes, and then we're going to kick it to you, Toni-Michelle. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I got chilly, you guys, so I had to get off camera and grab a sweater. So here I am. I loved what Candace said about belonging. And I think that resonated with me so much. I think that for me, leaning into my joy and my laughter and humor has brought so much peace and understanding of my role, right? Like in movement and in relationship with other people. I think that, you know, over the years, you know, collaboration with folks across experiences and identities and ideals have really been, you know, has really transformed, you know, my ability to show up and lean into that belonging. And so, yeah. Thank you for that question.
Absolutely. Well, I want to follow up for you, Toni-Michelle, and this is still a, you know, a general question for anyone to chime in after, but, you know, how does gender and identity affect how your leadership is valued in the various movements that you're part of?
Absolutely. I started this work as a queer baby 10 years ago on a campus, right? A queer non-binary baby back in 2009 at Norfolk State University. And my vision and goal for myself was to be in my fullness, being a part of change, you know, being like, you know, committed to my own transformation and supporting the transformation of others. Like I knew that like in this body and this experience, that's what I wanted to be a part of. And you know, when I transitioned, I learned that quickly that that kind of leadership and vision and strategy would not be appreciated, taken seriously, or acknowledged, right? In my experience as a Black trans woman. And over the past 5 years, you know, I've focused on Atlanta, developing, you know, Black trans folks who have been formerly incarcerated, who are sex workers, who are just organizers like yourself, right? Like just wanting to like get into the work. you know, have supported their development. And it has not been an easy fight. And with the Racial Justice Action Center and organizations like Women on the Rise and Southerners on New Ground, we were able to really practice what it was like to center the leadership of the most marginalized of us, right? We were able to really question and be in the hard moments of what it meant to shift conversations that allowed cis folks to be comfortable on city council, right? And challenge them to center the experiences of sex workers, to center the experiences of Black trans folks. And through that kind of presence, we've been able to really create a leadership development pipeline that has allowed myself and others to start as part-time organizers or interns to be executive directors and working for philanthropy organizations and leading their own programs and organizations. So I think that, you know, we have so much learning to do about grace, about principled struggle, in order to, again, center the most marginalized of us. Because we know that when we do that, we all get free.
Absolutely. Freedom is tasty. Yeah, so you know, and that's a question for all of you. I mean, Enei, is there anything that you would like to share about your experience, particularly around gender and identity in the intersection of all of the movements that you're a part of, particularly Indigenous rights, but definitely in the environmental space as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we cannot do any of this work unless we're understanding the interconnectedness, right, of the work for the land is a work for the people. And our people, I mean, I feel very privileged in terms of gender identity because I come from a culture that also recognizes a spectrum of gender identities. And that's not something that has been like prevalent from, like, it was squashed by colonial systems. It was squashed by colonization, this understanding of our gender, other genders, right? And so in this colonial system, we have this binary that has been perpetuated. It's not ours. And so I'm constantly working in a frame from a worldview that is counter to a colonial worldview. And from that frame, understanding that we have a deep history of understanding everybody's place in our and responsibility and role in our community, and understanding, like in Navajo, we have 4 genders. Some say 5, but we have no translation in English for those genders. So we don't have pronouns in our language. And so part of our belief in our work is, whether it's the earth or you know, the justice issues that we're standing up for, our people, that's the full spectrum of our people, need to be in the forefront of defining what those solutions are. And in particular, I believe that our cultural stories, our belief systems tell us that it is the other genders that bring us back together, that are our leadership in moving forward. And we cannot get to that place of liberation that we're all seeking without each other. And that's not, you know, and that is also like not just tokenizing. That means like that means real leadership and supporting the leadership of all our peoples, particularly all our relatives, right? Regardless of that, we got to break down all the binaries, because that system was never ours. It never worked for us, and so that's essentially how we organize, which seems like a big task, breaking down all those binaries. But that's the truth. That's the seed. That's the root of where we're trying to like really take out those rotten roots of colonialism.
Yeah, I think what's so powerful, and I'll actually come back to this and asking you more to kind of break down what decolonization looks like. But, it's so true. It is a lot of work to break down these boundaries, but what's also interesting is that it was a lot of work to put them up, and for a lot of cultures, particularly Black and Brown Indigenous cultures, really the work of decolonization, the work of abolition is a restoration of what was actually natural and organic for our cultures around the world. So thank you for that clarity and purpose. Candace.
I was like, we could end it on that, but yeah, I mean, I think that the only thing I would add is just that, at least for me in the work that I've done, it's primarily been around the, prison pipeline, mass incarceration. And historically, when we talk about criminal justice, even in the most progressive spaces, we forget that Black women, Black trans people are also deeply impacted by these systems, are also murdered by the police, are also being incarcerated at continuously higher rates. And when I was, a baby organizer, I remember being on a campaign where my boss, basically was a Black cis man, would shame me around the fact that I wasn't able to always effectively bring in Black men who had been incarcerated to our work, which, that's your job as an organizer, right? You reach out to folks and you bring them in. And I was able to get mentorship from other women of color who was like, but also like, what about all of the women, who are incarcerated in Minnesota, who are also struggling to get jobs, also struggling to get housing? And just from that, felt successful in my work when I was not trying to, do something that also wasn't true to my own story. I know the story of women who are at home who support men in prison, right? That is what is true to my story, and my specific experience. So I think that it's also for me, is in my leadership, is being as a Black woman, as a Black queer person, all of these different things, what do I know is true, and how do I start from that place, as we navigate solutions and not necessarily live into these binaries that even exist inside of our own spaces. And I think especially be challenged, as a person who presents as cis by trans folks, to do better. That is also part of my gender identity. It's not just about the ways that I am oppressed, but also the ways that I recognize and wrestle with the privilege that I am afforded. And how do I not just exploit that, but actually be cognizant of that and support the leadership of other folks who are not seen. Minneapolis is also the place in which CeCe McDonald was assaulted by a white supremacist, and folks forget that, when we're talking about George Floyd and all these things. And I don't want people to forget that history and those that real reality. So I think that those were that's some of the stuff that comes up for me.
Yeah, I think everything you said, and I think there's, just so much power that goes unnoticed, and nuance that goes unnoticed. When you think about the reaction locally, and I think nationally and even internationally, right? The focus has been on overwhelmingly Black cis and straight folks as the leaders who are changing things, right? But the truth is, and I was so glad to see the profile in the New York Times recently of Black Visions Collective, you, Candace, and so many other powerful folks like Aluchi and Miski Noor, and so I'm blanking on so many names. There's so many folks, but I just think about how important it is, and that was a Black queer woman writer uncovering the Black queer power that actually has been fueling this second iteration of the movement for Black lives. And of course, we know the first iteration was fueled by Black queer women in particular, and queer and trans folks across the spectrum. So thank you for sharing that. And I hope folks will be hungrier and thirstier and more curious from this conversation to really look at what has been uncovered about who is really fueling these movements. Not to take any shots at anybody, but just saying.
But if you go to any of these movement meetings when we could meet together,
yeah.
like that's who it was, and it's just so obvious to us, but it needs to be more public.
Absolutely. So I want to come back to this, particularly this conversation around decolonization. I actually think that will then also lead us into looking into some of the connections between decolonization and of course, abolition, which I think a lot of your work, Candace, and of course you too, Toni-Michelle, speaks to as well, and we'll kind of tease that out. So Enei, I want us to kind of frame for folks, what is decolonization, and maybe what are some of the entry points for folks to kind of move into a decolonized framework?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we do a lot of trainings. Our organization does the whole training on untangling colonialism, and you really have to have a shared history of our history, which is a history of colonialism, to really get then at, well, what is decolonization, right? And often I hear people say, what decolonization? You want to go back to like living in sod houses, or you want to go back to living the way you did before. No, decolonization isn't about like going back to living in pre-colonial times. Decolonization is about recognizing the systems of oppression that colonization has created, and then actively unlearning that, actively dismantling that, actively practicing ways that are informed by a different worldview. So, and often it can be some it's also a sexy word these days. A lot of people it's like decolonize this, decolonize that, I hear. And I push a little bit on it, because it did come from this, it comes from this recognition of colonial systems impacts on Indigenous peoples. And when I say Indigenous peoples, I don't just mean of this continent, I mean of Africa, of South America. As Indigenous peoples, we were uplifted, we were genocide, the takings of lands, the enslavement. And so understanding colonialism from that place, and really getting to a practice of, beyond just the tweaks in the system, beyond these small tweaks in a colonial system, how are we getting at the root causes of oppression, and really building a practice, whether that's in our personal life, in our community life, or on a systemic level of dismantling those colonial systems, which is can be some heavy stuff, right? Because like an elder says, one of our elders from up here in Alaska says, you don't know what you don't know until you know what you don't know, and so to try to think outside of a different worldview than we've always known can be difficult. And so we often, really try to recognize the deep-seated knowledge of place-based knowledge systems, that is peoples who have lived in harmony with the land for thousands of years. Not to romanticize them, but there's a knowledge system in place. There's a knowledge system that we need to uplift and use to inform our strategies moving forward. And so that means many things. That means like reclaiming our languages. That means reclaiming our cultural practices. That means thinking about strategies outside of the what has been funded even for the last how many decades, that hasn't gotten us to the place that we need to get to, right? That means funding leadership that's closest to the problems, because the people closest to the problems are the ones who probably guarantee you are closest to the solutions as well. So we do a 4-hour training on decolonization, so I could probably keep going, but I don't know how. I might just stop there and see if you have any more questions. Or
No, I think it's perfect. I mean, I think we'll come back, because there's something so generative about our conversations around decolonization, because like the elder you were speaking about, it does call for us to lean into a creativity, which hopefully will then lead us into a larger collective liberation that we're seeking. And sometimes, it is fear, and sometimes it is like folks just don't know how to put that creative hat on to do that work, right? To lend their like brain power, whatever power that they have, to furthering our crafting of solutions, right? They're just like, oh, well, we can just tweak what currently exists. But if what currently exists has been tweaked over and over again and it's led to harmful results, why are we so opposed to completely thinking outside of that box? Exactly what you were speaking to. And I think that there's such a natural connection there with our conversations around abolition, or in some ways the defund police campaigns, right, that we're talking about, which is, it's not quite all the same, right? These are different solutions that people are proposing. And so, Candace, I want to bring you back in here, because obviously, about 3 months ago, almost 4 months now, the Minneapolis City Council made a historic declaration and kind of moving towards and calling for the dismantling of the local police department. And, I think I'm curious about how you have figure out how to talk about what it means to defund police, what it means in terms of thinking about that as a solution for actually more safety for various communities. Because we know, when people start talking about defunding or dismantling or even abolition, the conversation often gets shut down because people are like, okay, well then how will I be taken care of? So can you kind of break down, when we're talking about these different aspects of shifting the conversation around safety, what are we speaking to?
Yeah, thank you. I think that ultimately what we are saying on the other end of defund is invest. And I, personally, as a leader in our movement, want us to be able to be even stronger communicators and put that at the forefront of people's brains when they hear those words, because I think that's ultimately what it is, and oftentimes folks are like, well, do you believe in defund or change or abolition? And I'm like, well, I think that it's a spectrum. And the ways, especially talking to folks who unfortunately have had to rely on police as a form of safety, quote unquote, even those who are harmed by it, right? Black folks, continuously also are like, but are you going to get rid of all the police tomorrow? What it's important is like, it's a transition, it's an evolution for our communities to really think about how do we move away from policing, which isn't keeping us safe. People are like, oh, well, crime rates this summer in Minneapolis went up. And I'm like, well, they went up with a $190 million budget. I don't think increasing that is the thing that's changing it, right? Because we've done that every single year. And so, that is part of how we talk to people about, is like that this is a transition, and that there are things that we know inside of our communities that we have done historically that help to keep us safe, and that we have oftentimes been the folks who navigate our own safety. And that the solution to our safety is not just having cops in t-shirts, right? Or a nicer version of police or a blacker version of police. It's actually looking at what keeps other communities safe. And oftentimes the communities that are most well-resourced are the ones that are quote unquote safest for the folks that are there. So people who have housing, people who have affordable health care, people who have employment, all of these things, have quality education. So I think it's also like, how do we talk to folks about like what actually would make you feel safe in your community, and sort of putting that question back on people. Is it more guys with guns? Or is it like, you knowing your neighbor, or feeling like you can get to a hospital easily, or that you have food, those kinds of things. And then the third thing is, I really like to talk to folks and push back that we don't have to have all of the solutions right now. And it's unfair. And I think it's a very colonial way of thinking to be like, and we know, right? Like, we've decided no more police. And after all of these decades of having police, we know the perfect solution that's going to keep everybody safe, that's going to make sure all of the rapists and murderers and all of these things are not an issue. Like, that is not fair, and that's not realistic. And it's actually not what safety means, right? Pulling folks away or just having instant answers has never actually kept us safe. It's only made things worse. And so I think also part of it is like asking community to be brave and bold and courageous. You know, that's what change actually takes, is being like, I don't know all the solutions, but I'm down to get with people on my block, to get people in my neighborhood, whatever, and say, all right, these are some of the ways that I could see alternatives to police, or these are some of the ways that I would feel a lot safer, or these are concretely what I want my mayor and city council member to be investing in instead of $190 million into police, right? Like, those are the kinds of conversations we have to be in and be willing to be part of it for a long haul. And I think that like our generation, and like in general, the way that politics have been positioned, is that we look for instant answers and we cede our power to other people to figure out things for us. And I think that part of the transition right now that we have to really culturally absorb is that we have to take agency, we have to take power, and actually making sure each other are safe. And that's like on the realist, you know, it's not in a like corny rainbows and whatever kind of way. It's on a like, how do you actually know your neighbor, you know, so that you can be like, hey, I'm going out of town, can you make sure that, you know, like those kinds of things are the ways that we transition. And that it's going to take a whole sort of like scope of changes and reinvestments on the other end of defunding, but it's the necessary first step so that we can unlock those resources and really unlock the potential for our imagination to think about something new and start experimenting it with it now, you know, because that's what we need to be doing, is like not wasting any more time either.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, you know, the thing that stuck out to me in what you were saying is the receptiveness to understand how unique the solutions have to be for an individual person, for a certain collective, for a particular community. And I actually think this is a perfect space for you, Toni-Michelle, to jump in, because I think you've had, obviously you've had wins. We were talking about the closing down of the Atlanta detention center. But I think the other kind of longer running win, right, is that you have been working in the abolitionist movement really from a Black trans feminist lens. And so I'm curious about what you have found on the field in kind of talking about what safety means and what it means to consider it from a collective space.
Yeah, I love that question so much, because one thing that I've learned is in all of the conversations that I've had with politicians, folks on the streets, folks in their house, my mama and grandma and them, honey, is that there is just this fear of understanding of or experiencing of like what's on the other side of yourself. And I think that when we talk about defunding police, like in Atlanta, is such a unique place because we are, you know, a heavily populated Black LGBTQ, you know, city and space, right? And we influence through music and through art and through social justice, right? Like so much of, you know, of Black futurism and like what it means, like to reimagine. You know, you got Outkast, you know, it's like everybody out here in the A. But for and so like what we've been working on in Atlanta is, again, how are we reaching people truly where they are? Like I was saying, we're in a majority Black LGBTQ space where folks do not want to defund police, right? And so like to have the conversations about what it means to be powerful, or like to only like folks are there, and again, we know that like fear causes so much like it blocks your capacity to like imagine and like to also just be present, right, with opportunities to like fight and win. And so I think that you know, some of the work that we're doing is in service of the political pieces of defunding the police is cultural work. And so we're blending with our folks. We know that, you know, it's going to take some time and has taken time, right? I think some of the things also that I've learned, I'm sorry I'm a little bit everywhere, but I hear so many different parts of your question. And I also hear Candace going off in my head. And so I'm like, yes, honey, it's all the thoughts. But I wanted to say, that, you know, we are Black folks and queer folks in the city of Atlanta. They understand what it means. They desire to build the capacity to dream and imagine. So we're really taking the opportunity to do that culture shift work. And we just launched a survey, SNAPCO and our community partners launched a survey called A Safer ATL, where, you know, we're asking folks questions, all folks in Atlanta, you know, just what their relationship is to police and their understanding. And what we're going to do with that is build a beautiful, powerful base of folks who are ready to like imagine and revision. And we're also going to skill up, right? So over the next few months, we will be, trans folks are going to be embodying what it means to be community responders, right? We're going to be in that deep practice like we've always been in our past campaigns of fighting for everybody Black and everybody in Atlanta, like even when they don't want to fight for us. And that work looks like, you know, being in hard conversations with folks, talking with folks and, you know, forcing them to pen to sign or a petition about marijuana use or defunding police, again, even when they don't want to because we're trans. But we have learned that when we are persistent and confident in our ability to recreate and embody like new transformations as trans folks, we lead with that magic in our city. And so we're hoping that this kind of cultural shift work will support the policy pieces and the political shift that's going to take next year when we are looking at that budget in ATL again.
All right. Thank you, Toni-Michelle. And thank you for sharing some of the work that's happening. So we're going to actually start inserting some of our audience questions in now because we have a few queued up. It looks like people are really engaged. So the first question, it seems to really be speaking to what it means to kind of build a multi or an intergenerational coalition of folks interested in fighting for these different issues. So this question is, are you confident that the younger members of your communities will strongly join political action today and into the future? Have you seen any big changes, I guess, particularly recently? And this is to anyone.
I mean, I could start. I'm very confident because we are doing it consistently. And I think that if, you know, we limit political action to just like electoral politics, then we're definitely limiting the power and the voice and the action of young people. But, you know, when I was out there during the uprising, young Black and brown people started the uprising, like tinies. I saw chucking stuff, and I'm just so proud of those folks. And like, I just turned 30 and now I'm like on the older edge, I guess, of young. And and so I do feel very confident. I think that even when it comes to electoral justice, young people have really been paving the way for campaigns and other things that are much more rooted and relevant to people right now. You know, TikTok is a threat to our federal government for a reason. And that is entirely because of young people creating political content that is like changing hearts and minds and getting people to take action, getting people to do new stuff. So I feel really confident. And I think that, again, we have to change up these systems. We need to stop relying on two-party systems and things like that, and having to pick between, you know, two mediocre or like terrible white men all the time, for young people to really feel like they're seen and heard inside of political work. And we need to redefine political action to be also about how we're changing narratives, how we're shifting culture, and how we're shifting policies.
I just agree with a lot of what Candace said. I think I started out as a youth organizer like 20 years ago now, something like that. But I've always seen the power of young people organizing, because I feel like there's like less boundaries. And, you know, it's like, it's the vision is so fresh, and I think, you know, we try to do what we can also to not squash those visions, because those, I believe those visions are the visions that are going to lead us forward. And yeah, part of our work is to really try to hold space and for young organizers to really speak their vision and really help them to, or, you know, support them in creating that change. And you know, as someone with three young ones, I know that they have taught me so much. And also I know that this is their, you know, they say it all the time, this is our future, Mom, this is and so, you know, and at the same time, I don't want it's so much weight to put on them, but also just really feel, as someone just feel like we got to do what we can to support young people in this work. And I'm seeing more and more young people stand up out of like, almost, you mean, it's a demand for their future. So I'm happy to follow their leadership and support how we can. We need to. It's a necessity.
I am very confident. Very, very, very confident.
Yeah, I am too, and I think I think that what is, you know, you all model what it looks like to bring youth and younger folks into your spaces, right? Whether it's, you know, taking care of folks who just need basic needs met, right? Or breaking bread with folks, giving them tips and and ideas for their protesting, bringing on summer interns, right? Like I know all, you know, like I actually came into a lot of this movement work through an internship at Solutions Not Punishments Collaborative. And that's how I met Toni-Michelle. So I mean, I think it's so powerful, you know, to see the work that you all do. I know over at Native Movement, y'all also have a summer internship program as well. Candace, I mean, y'all's whole like team just be out in them streets, honey, and you have such a range of conversations that you have with elders and younger people, right? So that I think that also runs the gamut in everyone's work. So yeah, so I also just want to add, and then I'll throw back into my moderator role, but you know, I think one of the things that we have to be particular about is when I think about that first kind of iteration of the movement for Black Lives, you know, a lot of the younger organizers and activists weren't met, you know, with open arms and love, right? I think a lot of more seasoned folks in social justice, you know, sometimes the knee-jerk reaction is to just critique without, you know, providing the support, the construction, providing the space to like make mistakes or not come off, come off as not so respectable, right? Because that's also a thing we have to shed when we see younger folks come, right? So I think that that's so powerful to hear y'all speak on that. So our next question from the audience is talking about, and this actually ties to another question I had around how, you know, speaking to the relationship between Black trans women and Black cis women and amongst trans women of color, what are the points of strength and unity and what are the areas of conflict? So they made this question very big. I don't want to put you on the spotlight, Toni-Michelle, but of course, as our resident trans feminist scholar over here, or an innovator, what are your thoughts on that question?
You scared me. I was like, what's going on? So, yes, my thoughts on that question. You know, strength and unity is, you know, lies like within our resilience and in our ability to reimagine. And I think that the more that we lean into the power of like how we rest and reinvent ourselves and support each other and show up for each other and care, like nurture each other and see each other like with grace and patience. I feel like we embody that as women and young folks, Black trans folks, Black cis folks. We embody those like characteristics and I think that, yeah, we should lean into it more. I think that some of the areas of conflict comes in when we struggle with belonging and struggle with understanding what our roles are individually and collectively, and not saying roles within like this binary context, but like, again, our roles in like how we love on each other, how we like hold space for each other, like who grabs the chair, who grabs the blanket, who does the prayer, that type of role, right? That is, you know, everybody, you know, everybody can embody in some way. And I just think that the more that we're confident that we belong together to do that for each other, I feel like that is that's when we will be the most powerful. That's when we will feel and experience being seen in ways that we search for from each other and desire from each other. Yeah, that's what I want to offer to that question. That's a great question. You had me all in here like sweating.
Yeah, are there any other thoughts too? Because I know Candace and Enei, you both have spoken to the importance of gender expansiveness in your work, in your cultures. What has been your experience in being leaders in these spaces, right? And having a certain amount of power to ensure that folks are moving with an expansive way of connection that Toni-Michelle was speaking to, you know, around gender, right? Making sure that like trans and gender nonconforming folks, non-binary folks, agender folks, right? Two-spirit folks are seen and respected in their full honor and dignity.
Well, yeah, I think part of our work has been to recognize our privilege that we're in this system as if we're, you know, cis folks, to make space for recognizing everyone and the full spectrum of our community. We do a lot of trainings and organizer trainings, and we do a lot around just having to kind of be the ones to like push on some of our community that maybe is still like living in the binary, right? And so using our privilege as cis folks to say, hey, look, you know, this is a practice you might not do, in terms of like whether it's understanding like gender pronouns, or whether it's like seeing people, you know, seeing the full spectrum of gender. Like it kind of, we have to be the ones that are, you know, making the room uncomfortable for other, right? Like I think it's easy for me to say, look, I'm not gonna, you can't do that anymore. You can't say that anymore, whether it's our community who doesn't recognize folks' gender pronouns, or whether they're you know, still stuck in the binaries. It's a lot of our work has been to educate folks as well, and make space, and to like insist that our spaces are really recognizing the fullness of our community. So that's some of what we've been doing, particularly, I think, you know, in Native communities. There's also a lot of, because of these colonial systems and religion, there's been a lot of that knowledge of our people outside of a binary has been lost. And so we've had to do a lot of educating and holding space and pushing back.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add to that, I feel like part of the thing for me has been like that I am forever growing and will mess up, and understand that I will cause harm, and that my job is not to tiptoe or walk around on eggshells as I'm trying to be in solidarity, especially with Black trans women, but to recognize that and to learn and grow from that. You know, I think that's really a big piece for me, in addition to what's already been said, is like that just realness. And the other thing, and like also why I've like always loved SNAPCO and think is like an important model, is like it's also not about building relationships based on tokenization. You know, I think that happens a lot. What I've seen in our movements is tokenizing folks, tokenizing trans folks to be sort of the speakers, or to be like, oh, you've never organized before, but it's fine. You're trans, we'll let you do it. And it's like, no, that's so messed up, right? Like, our job is actually to support folks' leadership and to recognize that these are skills and things that people need to build. And I love when Snapco and other folks talk about the ways that part of centering trans folks' leadership is developing their leadership, is actually making them effective folks and investing in those things. And I think right now I'm like still on a journey as I'm now a co-director also, who my co-director is a Black trans person and an immigrant, and amazing, Miski Noor. But I feel like on a personal journey of really figuring, as a director, how am I really making sure, and as part of an organization that's centering Black, queer, and trans people, how we are really actually doing that. And being an active listener when I continue to mess up, and not like shame spiraling, but being like, all right, cool, I can do better, you know? Because I think some of the like dopest organizers, the biggest lessons I've learned have been specifically from Black trans folks. And their leadership is necessary, their experience is necessary. Again, back to the reality that like we need solutions that actually get at the root of things. And, you know, that's only going to happen if we actually have people who have experienced the deepest, most entangled roots of oppression in our society at the table, making those decisions, offering those solutions. So, you know, I think that that's part of it. And as a person who at least presents as cis, it is also interrupting folks, you know, like I got my dad to be out here correcting himself on pronouns when my homies come around, and have had to do that in movement spaces as well. And it goes beyond pronouns, you know, of course, but I do think that like putting ourselves in that position is also part of the conflict, and how we navigate that is by learning from our mess ups, and being a better ally, and actually being in solidarity in the ways that we want folks with privilege to be in solidarity with us as well.
Yeah, thank you, Candace. Thank you all for your answers. The time just hit me, and we have so much more we could discuss. But I encourage you to follow each and every one of our amazing panelists' work, whether it's on social media or following their websites, which have been dropped in the chat. So we have one last question, and then we're going to move to our closing. This actually was a two-part question, and I hope they at least are happy that we can at least get to one half of it. But this person says, Ya'ate, which I think means hello. I may be pronouncing that incorrectly. But they were showing some love for you, Enei, from another Totachini Navajo person. So there we go. And I'm going to actually jump to the second part of their question, which I think is great, and expand it a little bit. So they're saying dreaming and visioning of the future is crucial to decolonization. I would also add to abolition as well. How do we urge others to dream, especially when our realities in this country seem so bleak right now? Which is a big question, but we'll make this our final and closing thought from our panelists. And Enei, since they addressed you directly, we'll start with you.
Well, Yate, you did really good there. Yate, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And first, I didn't at the beginning recognize I'm sitting now on the lands, the unceded traditional territories of the Dene peoples of the Lower Tanana, also known as Fairbanks, Alaska. So I just wanted to recognize the peoples whose territories I'm on. And, you know, sometimes, I'll be honest, 2020 has been sometimes hard for me to figure out, to find that dreaming and visioning in some moments of this year. But, you know, I look at I look at the people power that has been that has been mobilizing again and again all over this country, and that is actually what keeps me going this year over and over. I mean, the folks who have been in the streets from Minneapolis to actually even as far as the North Slope, Barrow, Alaska, and all over, the people who are, you know, getting out of their like bubble, even like their safety zone, and putting their bodies out there because of our values and our vision and our need for a change. That's been what has kept me going, and what I feel like to me is the most hopeful. What I'm seeing is like, these are steps to liberation. And nobody said it was going to be easy. Nobody said it's going to be energizing. You know, in some days it's painful, and some days it's so exhausting, and it's like viscerally hurts. And yet I believe those are steps to liberation. And so, you know, how do we urge others to dream? I mean, I always find so much energy and vision in our collective when we bring together the people, whether it's our elders, it's our young people, it's our folks who haven't been, you know, they're not the ones creating these.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh, Enei, are you still there? I think we might have had a quick technical issue. I'll kick it to you, Toni-Michelle, and then if Enei comes back, then we'll finish her thought.
Yes. I actually really love this question because I be dreaming and scheming. And I also love how the question is phrased and asked. But one thing I want to say, she's back.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know where I went.
It was wild. You were there, and then yeah. Did you make sure to were you able to finish your thought?
I don't even know where I was at. I was going on, and then all of a sudden you weren't there. So, I don't know what I said, but I don't want to interrupt the flow that's happening right now too.
No interruption. I was just starting, so I was happily ready to finish out your thoughts and hear what you wanted to say. So if it comes back, just share, you know. Yes. But one thing that I wanted to say based on the question is that, you know, what is urgent for you is not going to be urgent for other people. And even though that may be really hard to hear as activists and as movement, it is just the realest shit ever, okay? And so, you know, we know, and we already know this, right? How long have we been saying, you know, Black Lives Matters, Black trans lives matters, and even now having to expand into like all Black Lives Matters and capture, you know, like everybody. It's like everybody is going to always be in their own understanding and imagination. And it's our job as organizers to invite, not even urge, but like to invite our people, right, into these dreams and into, you know, this process of scheming. And I think that by embodying and modeling like grace and patience, ratchetness, classiness and sexiness, all of that stuff are like the qualities of like humanity that like we are in transformation, right? Like is where we are in humanity, and that's where folks are hungry and ready to be a part of that. So love that question. Oh, and I love my answer, but I love that question.
Thank you. Candace, take us home.
Yes. I mean, I think that I also love this question. And the first thing that came up to me is like, well, what other choice we got? Like that's also kind of how I feel, is like, what else other choice do we have but to dream and to scheme about a new world? Because the way that it's being dreamed and schemed about now, especially on the scheming part, is not in our favor. And so I think that we just need to make that choice. And I will say, just to add on to Toni-Michelle's point, I think that also, like, we forget that our brain is a muscle, and that colonization and capitalism and all of these isms that we experience have actually trained our brain, the muscle, to be very limited, unfortunately, and to not be as expansive as we could be. Those things have really tried to do that. So part of the practice is actually just getting people into practice of it, starting really small and getting people to think about, like, yeah, what could 5% look like from the police department? That felt small, and people are like, wow, but we at least got people to start practicing it. And what folks don't know is we've been on this since 2018. What happens in Minneapolis doesn't happen without that work, that practice of dreaming and visioning something different, especially when it comes to abolition. So I think that that's part of it. And I definitely think that the modeling is part of it, like inside of our organizations, especially. I'm a big believer in organization, because I think it's a practice ground in which we get to be like, yeah, this is how we change up how we deal with conflict and harm, or this is how we change up how we even take care of each other, or how we make decisions together, which, at least for me, like, most young Black people don't have an experience of someone being like, so what's your opinion? Right. And it actually matters here, and it's actually going to change the course of what we all do together. And that also, I think, is part of the dreaming and visioning, is allowing people to the space to try it out, to throw the spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. In that. And then the other part's like, yeah, well, we could keep on going with the way things are. If you prefer that option than just trying, I mean, not to shame anybody, but I'm kind of like, the petty part of me is like, okay, but obviously we must do something else.
Yeah, I thank you so much, Candace. I think what is so powerful from this conversation is just that this work is really pushing us to vision more expansively and bigger, and make sure that more and more people get their needs met, but also get to live up to their fullest potential, and gain the livelihoods that we deserve. And that's really what this whole conversation series has been about, taking that commemoration of the 19th Amendment, and how for some people that was such a landmark moment, particularly for white women. That was such a landmark moment, but also knowing that so many different types of women, whether it was Black women or Native American women, Latinx women, Asian women, so many different groups of women didn't have that same access, right? Women who weren't necessarily having access to education, regardless of the race, right? Women who didn't have a certain economic status didn't have the same access, right? And so it's just been an honor to be in conversation with such powerful leaders like all of you on here today. And I encourage our audience to continue to follow their work and the work of these movements, because we're all in this together. I think that's one of the big lessons of this time of mass unrest and an ongoing pandemic. And of course, we're in the throes of an election. So yeah, just continue to find spaces where we can talk more about our differences, but also our points of connection. And with that, I want to thank you all for being on this panel. Thank all of our audience members. If you've been rocking with us all of these weeks since August, thank you so much. And please follow forwomen.org, which is the website for the Miss Foundation, or brooklynhistory.org, which is the website for the Center for Brooklyn History, naturally, to learn more about our future work, and of course, whatever speaker series might be on the horizon in the future. Wink, wink. So thank you so much, and have a good night.